Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're in the midst of our series of studies. We've been talking about 1 Corinthians chapter 13, making application to it to the home and to the church family as well. And that's been our discussion over the past several weeks, and we continue that. We're in lesson 5. If you have the lesson sheets or if you grabbed one off the table in the back, that's the lesson that I put back there in case you forgot yours or coming in new. And so this is what we started Wednesday, right? We talked a little bit about you can't have joy and love inside of marriages and inside of our homes if there isn't truth and honesty inside that environment. It's kind of hard to have the kind of home lives that we're looking for if there's not a trust and an appreciation for honesty and truth inside those relationships. And so that's kind of what we talked about last Wednesday. We'll move forward in our study, Lord willing, here in just a few moments in this discussion about how truth and joy, because that's what he said, love rejoiceth in the truth there in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 6. That's where we'll find our study this morning. But before I go any further, if you would, let's bow our heads together in a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for your love and your watch care over us this morning. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to come together and to study your word, to appreciate your message. Again, give us the courage to make application of the things that we learned today. We're mindful of several, Father, that have been taken to the hospitals this morning and to facing various challenges. We just pray that you continue to bless everyone who's facing various health situations at this time, and we pray your blessings upon them this morning. Thank you again for loving us. Thank you again for Jesus and for the benefit that he brings to all of us and the great hope and promise we find in him. Again, be with us as we study this morning. We pray all these things through thy Son's name. Amen. Okay, so last Wednesday, I keep saying last week, but 4 days ago, Wednesday, we talked about the importance of truth in marriage, and we talked a lot about Matthew 19, right? We talked about a lot about that bond. We talked about the importance of understanding that when you've made that vow and you've made that commitment, that you honor that. But this morning I'll try to add a little more to that. We don't just honor it, right? We want to bring joy and love and happiness and peace into that bond and relationship. Not just, well, I've got to do this because thus saith the Lord. That's part of it. But I ought to feel a little more love and joy and reasoning behind it than just that. So we'll talk a little bit about that this morning. Sometimes I should have went back and listened to the class and make sure I didn't miss something. Any leftover questions? I know I kind of had to end abruptly a little bit Wednesday. Anything you had that I didn't talk about that you had a question about from our study on Wednesday? I'll give you a chance because I didn't give you that chance at the end. Okay, good. Let's move on then. Let's talk a little bit about Ephesians chapter 5, and let's talk about the importance of these descriptions that God provides for us through men like the Apostle Paul. And I always find it interesting because the Apostle Paul isn't what? He's not married, okay? The Apostle Paul isn't married, but he speaks about marriage really more than anybody else does. Of course, you might be able to argue that he speaks about everything more than anybody else does because the bulk of the New Testament epistles are written by him, and so I suppose that would be a fair argument as well. But let's just talk a little bit. We spoke already in our study about the first 4 or 5 verses from Ephesians 5, verse 22. Let me pick up the conversation in verse 28. Notice he said, "So ought men to love their wives as their what? As their own bodies." Why is that, by the way, based on what we learned Wednesday? One flesh, right? Two become one. We spoke very detailed about that on Wednesday night. The importance of recognizing that when you enter into a marriage, two become one. You take two and they make them one. That's why fornication is a violation of that relationship, right? That's why that becomes a problem. And then Matthew 19 addresses how certain things can be done as it relates to that. You love your wives as your own body because two became one. And he that loveth his wife loveth himself. We talk about the golden rule, right? What's the golden rule we often talk about? Do unto Yeah. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Would that not apply to the marriage relationship as if it applies to anything else? If it applies to every other circumstance in life, then why in the world would we not consider it a vital part of the marriage bond and relationship? Whatever I do affects Deborah, period. That's the relationship, right? Two became one, and so anything and everything I do affects her. And the choices I make and the decisions I make and how I behave, all of it affects her. And so if I have any respect for myself, I need to have respect for her. If I want any kind of love towards me, then I need to be offering love towards her. That's the relationship. That's how it works. And we've got to men step up into our responsibilities that God gives us to love our wives in that fashion. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth, even as the Lord the church. That was our theme, if you will, in this particular point in the study. But he talks about love, he talks about nourishing and cherishing. What do those words mean? To care for, okay. What else do you think of when you hear words like nourish and cherish? Okay. Okay, so if you cherish something, you protect it, and you protect it because it has value, right? It has value. Right, so you elevate, right? Your wife should be elevated in your mindset. You nourish and cherish her differently than you would do some possession or any other relationship in some senses. That's a valuable understanding here. Okay, so that relationship's got you would hope, improves over time through a growth process. And in order for any real growth to occur in anything for that matter, it needs nourishment. It needs that continual care to make it better and to improve it. And we would understand that in everything else, right? If you want children to grow up healthy, you nourish them in the right ways. If you want a good job and you want to be promoted and you want to move up that corporate ladder, then what do? You nourish those relationships within that corporate structure, and you do the things necessary to make yourself of value in those situations. We recognize this in several other circumstances. Men in particular, according to Paul here, we need to appreciate it more and more in the marriage relationship. What am I doing as a husband to nourish, to feed, to provide for, to help grow this bond and connectivity that I have with my wife? And interestingly, if I just gave you the words nourish and cherish, who would you generally think of in the marriage relationship? If you didn't read this text beforehand, you would think that is a female thing, wouldn't you? You would think that is something the wife should do. The wife should be about nourishing and cherishing. That seems to be something in that category. Not according to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul tells men, husbands, love your wives. No one should hate his own self. You should love her, and if you want that mutual love and respect in return, then you need to be offering that. No man ever hated his own body, but nourished and cherisheth it, even as the Lord of the church. That's what we should be doing towards our spouses. And I think sometimes we get lost. We kind of get this idea that I told her I loved her 42 years ago, and I haven't changed my mind and haven't said anything. Right? That's not nourishing. That's trying to sustain, not nourish. And we've got to be careful about that. Any other thoughts you had about that idea of nourish and cherish? Every man in this room could probably do better, starting with me, going to the rest of you. So let's talk a little bit about this then as he continues. For we are members of his body, of his flesh. What's the comparison, by the way, then? Jesus and the church, right? Let's push the pause button for a minute on that. Where would the church be if Jesus didn't love it, cherish it, nourish it? Right? Where would the church be? Where would his body be? If it wouldn't be, right? It wouldn't be. If Jesus just left it to itself, it would be chaos and problematic. Because Jesus cherishes and nourishes and feeds and leads and guides his body. That's the imagery here. For this cause. That's interesting, right? Because where's this phrase come from in verse 31? Back to the beginning. What Jesus do in Matthew 19 when they brought that question about marriage up to him, where did he point them to? They wanted to go to Moses. Who did he say? Yeah, I'm going back to God the Father in Genesis chapter 2. That's where I'm going to take you, Jesus said. Jesus does it, so it's not shocking that Paul does it here in Ephesians chapter 5. But what I love about what Paul does for us here is he connects it to this concept and this level of teaching about nourishing and cherishing and building and growing and nurturing this marriage relationship. And he said, after that conversation, and for this whole idea of how we've joined into one flesh together, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Why should we often call it leave and cleave, right? That's the imagery here. Why? Why does Paul say that's important? If I don't leave and cleave to this spouse, if I continue to stay attached back here, it's going to kind of be hard to nourish and cherish a new family and a new relationship. And right? He didn't say abandon all family, right? That's not what he says here. What he says is a man needs to recognize that once he chooses a wife and he decides to become married, his priorities change. Sometimes men fail to nourish and cherish their relationship with their wife because they're tied to other things. They haven't left or cleaved to this new relationship in the proper ways. And we've talked about some words of caution about that already. That's how we bring joy into the marriage. That's how we bring love into the marriage. Is my wife needs to know continually that she's my priority and that I have forsaken all other and I have become one flesh with her and I'm cleaving to that relationship. And that's an important part of this process. It's interesting. He says, this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. It's an interesting text because sometimes the Bible will give us spiritual lessons that help us make applications to earthly relationships. At other times, the Bible will give us earthly relationships that will help us understand spiritual connectivity. Let's be honest about the text for a moment. What's his real conversation in Ephesians chapter 5? That's right. Christ in the church. That's his conversation in Ephesians chapter 5. He turns to the husband-wife relationship to help them look at another earthly relationship to help them appreciate what Jesus is all about as it relates to his body, the church. And so he even says that in verse 32. It's a hard concept to grasp how Jesus is the head over the body, that we work collectively together in that sense. But nevertheless, though this is a conversation about the church and Jesus, nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. Even though I'm having a conversation about the church and how Jesus is the head over that body, I've used this illustration about husbands and wives to help you appreciate it. Don't miss that point as well, Paul says in verse 33. Nevertheless, though the conversation was about this is really something you need to remember about this conversation as well. let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself. And really, at the end of the day, I've always said, and people get hung up on words like reverence and honor and obey, and we get these concepts into our heads, and we fail to realize that God established a relationship between husbands and wives that allows for this to work. My wife will have no problem respecting me if I love, cherish, nourish, bring joy, happiness, peace into that relationship. There won't be a conflict here. There won't be a battle. Generally speaking, in my anecdotal experiences, folks who struggle with the reverence side or that respect side and that order side that God has established are generally folks in situations where the husband isn't doing his side of that. And so it's kind of hard to respect and reverence because he doesn't do anything to love, nourish, cherish, grow. And that's where the challenges often come. And you've heard me say a billion times, I'm going to say it one more time, I'm always harder on the husbands and men in a class like this because I tell ladies, go talk to a godly woman, right? You'll learn much more. You'll learn much more about how to be a wife, how to be a mother, you'll learn so much more. Go find a godly than you can ever learn from me. I can read to you scripture, I can give you principles, but go talk to somebody, right? But men, I can talk to you because I know my own failures. I know the challenges. I understand what it is to try to live up to God's principles about marriage, and that's why I tend to be harder on men than anyone else. Your thoughts, questions you have. Love, cherish, nourish. Those are all things that a lot of men struggle to recognize are vital if the marriage relationship and that bond is going to grow. Let me add a couple extra texts for you. Look at Luke chapter 6, verse 31. And this is kind of that golden rule thought that we shared with you a minute ago. But he said, as you would, that men should do to you, do ye also to them. Again, I simply argue if that pertains to all men, it would certainly pertain to my marriage relationship. Why would I want to treat my wife in a way that I wouldn't treat others or in some ways that I wouldn't want to be treated? I may have shared this story with you once before, but humor me if I did. But I know of a fella, and obviously I'm not going to name him to you in the room nor to the World Wide Web, but I know a fella that one time he was traveling, and as he was traveling, his wife called him, and she was upset, and she said, "Honey, I'm so sorry. I locked myself out of the house, and it cost me $50 for a locksmith to come and unlock the house." And he derided her for 15 minutes about what a wasteful waste of money, that you couldn't have figured out a better way to get in that house, and how silly that was for you to lock yourself out, and all of these things. And 10 minutes later, he gets pulled over for speeding that cost him $165. Do you think he derided himself for 20 minutes? No. No. What's your point, Brian? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As ye would that men should do to you, do ye also likewise to them. If that needs to be big and bold in our marriage relationships. Why would I treat my wife in a way that I wouldn't treat myself under the same set of circumstances? Why would I fuss at her about something that I've been guilty of myself? Right? Again, I'm sorry, man. You're going to get my beat down today. It's just the way it is. But wives, I'll reverse that for a second. You could be guilty of the same thing. You know, you could have 65,000 Longaberger baskets. They still make those, by the way. I don't even know whether they make those things or not. No. Thank you, right? right. But I said it wouldn't ring, Randy. He's downstairs. I was wrong. It reset itself. Ignore that. I don't know why it rang. But we have to be careful that we're not treating each other differently about the very same things. And that we get upset on one side, but not on another. And so we need to work on that. Your thoughts?
Yeah. It's the one mind part that takes an immense amount of effort. Yeah. Because the thought processes, men are fixers. They just want to say, when the wife comes up and says, I've got this problem, does she really want you to fix that problem, or she just wants you to listen to what I got this problem? Yeah. And it's two different minds is the hardest part you'll ever do.
Sure. And that aspect of becoming one is the challenge, I think, sometimes that we have to work on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that before we're done here in a minute.
Ron, can you elaborate a little bit on verse 32 there, Ephesians, about the mystery?
Yeah, I'll go back to that for a second. Bob's asking, if you couldn't hear him, was
hasn't been revealed, that is kept secret, and be revealed at a later date.
I don't know that that's what Paul's saying here. I don't think he's trying. I think all Paul's trying to say is that this conversation may feel like, how is it that Christ is head over how is it that he can be a head over a body? And how do these people work? How do all these people become and fitly join together and create one body? Because that's the conversation of Ephesians chapter 5, is Christ in the church. And so I think that's what he's referencing. This seems somewhat mysterious. It seems like a great mystery that this is even possible. But that's a leading statement to get to his last statement. This may be hard for you to grasp. Jesus as the head over a body. You may have to think about that a while. Nevertheless, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church, and wives, reverence your husbands. That's not a mystery. I think that's just a contrast, I think, is what he's doing there. It's just a contrast between how it is more of a challenge to understand how Jesus is the head over the body and that the church is the bride of Christ. That's a more difficult concept to conjure. But husbands, love your wives. Wives, reverence your husbands. That's a simpler principle. And I think that's all he's doing there in that verse. That's a good question, though. Any other thoughts?
Ryan, we always, as man and wife, constantly talk about our relationship. Now, Pam and I do this all the time. It's constantly a give and take. Find the good things, find the bad things. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to do this? And come to a conclusion that we all both understand.
Yeah.
We both understand the goal.
I think, Gary, you're right. And I think we do bring more love and joy into a spousal relationship and to a family relationship as well when it never feels like just we're being dictated to. We're one flesh, and we're working together to resolve everything from minor to major, right? Because that's who we are in this relationship, and I could tell you, and again, men, just keep your eyes down for a second, but I can tell you that the most unpeaceable moments in my 29 years have been when I just arbitrarily decided something, didn't have a conversation, and then I had to have a conversation after I'd done it. I see some of you guys going, yeah, I've been there, right? That's a mistake. That's a mistake. And I should learn from those mistakes moving forward. Is it going to happen once? Sure, it's going to happen sometimes. Wives will do the same thing sometimes. Make a decision or a choice, never got any input or consideration. Husbands do it too. And then for a little while, there's not a lot of love and joy and peace going on because of that. But if I had paused and had a conversation first, and said, we're together here, minor and major, doesn't matter, and we work together through things. It makes it, and you're right, Gary, it makes it a lot better. Go to Ephesians chapter 1. My problems always tend to deal with cars, by the way, but anyway. It's Ephesians chapter 1, verse 15. I want you to notice this as an example for us. He said, "Wherefore I also, after I heard of your faith," this is Paul speaking about church at Ephesus, "after I heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and love unto all the saints, cease not to give thanks for you, making mention of you in my prayers." Now, I realize that they're not the same. They're not identical. He's talking about his love and appreciation for the faith of the church there at Ephesus. But here's the point I want you and I to extract from it. He says, "He ceased not to give thanks for you, making mention of you in my prayers." I want to ask you a quick question here. When's the last time you prayed for your spouse? When was the last time, right, that I took a moment to, number one, express my appreciation before the God who provided her to me, or the God who provided him to me, for the ladies? When was the last time I expressed that, number one, to God? And then Paul said, I've done that as it relates to my prayers to God. And then he tells them that I appreciate you and your faith and your love for the Lord. I don't know that there's a marriage relationship that I've ever witnessed that probably didn't have moments where we just take each other for granted, right? We just take it for granted. And we're not intentionally trying to be unappreciative. We're not intentionally trying to be unthankful. We're not intentionally trying to rob the home of joy and happiness and peace. Our intents and our motives may not have anything to do with wanting to cause trouble. But our lack of any kind of appreciative communication is speaking volumes all the time that I maybe just take you for granted, and I don't really express the appreciation I should for what you do and how you do it and the manner in which you do it. We can all be guilty of that. What I love about Paul's example here is he took the time in his letter to Ephesus, lots of spiritual needs he was going to have to talk about, lots of concepts and teachings that he wanted to share with them. He'll get to those. But in the early part of his letter, one of the earliest things that he does is says, thank you. Thank you for your faith in the Lord. Thank you for the example that you set in relationship to that faith. You and I can do better. To take the time and to be thankful for the love and the joy and the things that we do for one another in our family relationships. It's interesting when you're teaching children and somebody hands them a gift and you're waiting, right? You're waiting. Are they going to say it on their own? Are they going to say it on their own? And you're hoping for that moment where the child has learned enough over time to automatically say what? Thank you. Because that's validation, right? For parents. It's like, yes, validation. We've done this right. But when we don't hear it after those first few seconds, what do we do? What do you say? What do you say, right? It's training, it's teaching. And the goal, right? The goal of that, because they're children, the goal of that is to ultimately raise children that are continually appreciative. By the way, side point, if I raise my children through all the years while they're in my home and I never encourage them to express thanks and appreciation, they're going to have a hard time knowing how to do that in a marriage relationship. That's why it's important when they're 3, 4, 5 years old or younger to start instilling that idea into their minds, to be thankful and appreciative, so that when they grow to be adults and they enter adult relationships, they've had years and years and years of experience of how it is that you express thanksgiving and appreciation. But why is it that you almost wish there was, a moment where the wife has done something kind for the husband and he just walks away as if it meant nothing? Or the husband's done some act of kindness for the wife and she just walks away as if they'd done nothing. No, we need to do better. What do you say, right? Express it. And by the way, we can all be guilty. Well, she knows, right? She knows that I love her. She knows I appreciate her. She knows I'm thankful. No, how does she know that? Because she's not getting it out of your body language, and she's not getting it out of your actions, and she's not getting it out of your words. So how does she know that, right? How does she know that? That's a fair question. Paul expressed it. He said it to people. I give thanks for you. I appreciate you. We can do better. We can do better. And we'll bring love, joy, and happiness, peace, all those things we're trying to drive at here in our conversations in better ways towards that relationship. Let me go back to 1 Peter chapter 3, or to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Because this is something Doug kind of mentioned a moment ago, and I want to come back to it. He says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. Fact. God created men and women differently. He created them for the intent of being harmoniously helpful to each other. What one lacked, the other can provide. And that's the way God designed and purposed things intentionally. But back to what Doug talked about a little bit ago, men, don't treat your wife as if she needs to behave and react to every scene the same way you or I do. And Doug's right. She may just want you to listen to her for 4 or 5 minutes. She doesn't want you to fix it. She just wants you to listen for a minute and pay attention to whatever it is that's concerning her. It had been the first year or two Deborah and I were married. And Deborah was watching some Hallmark-esque kind of movie. I don't even know whether Hallmark movies were out then yet, but it was that kind of movie. And somebody in the movie had died. And I go in as she's watching this movie, and tears are rolling down her face. And young, not very bright Brian decided that was the moment he should educate her about movie making. And that actress is not really dead. In fact, if you flip over a few channels, you'll probably find her, and she's perfectly well and alive. Why are you crying? In about the 3rd or 4th year, I learned I am a lot better off if I cry right along with her. Right? She doesn't need me to fix that aspect of who she is. I need to cherish that aspect of who she is. God designed her to be perfectly suited to me. I don't want to be married to me. Right? I need a helpmeet. I need somebody that complements and works in conjunction with me, thinks about things differently than I do, sees things from a different vantage point and viewpoint than I do. I need that. But if I stymie that, and I'm always trying to fix the very nature and character God designed her in, I'm not helping that marriage relationship, and I'm not bringing much love and joy into that circumstance either. Friends, husbands, we've got to be better. We got to be better. Now, wives, you appreciate that as well. He's different than you. And most likely, now there's some exceptions to this, but most likely he would prefer to sit on that bench outside of that store in that mall than he would to peruse it, right? And that's okay. Husbands, you can sit there patiently, right? It's not the end of the world. Yeah, it's okay. We don't have to fix that. I don't understand. Well, you don't want to go shopping for 62 hours with me. Well, let me give you a lot of explanation as to why I don't, right? I'm just trying to illustrate to us, this goes both ways. It's a two-way street. And in this relationship, we've got to appreciate what roles and purposes and design that God has created us all in order for it to work properly. And that's the love and respect that we need to share with one another. Your last-minute thoughts or questions? Appreciate everything this morning. And by the way, upstairs class, be forewarned, that bell should not have rung. There will no longer be a bell in the adult classroom. They'll only get it downstairs in their individual classrooms. So just be forewarned about that. And so that's why they're already coming up. Their bell worked properly in their classrooms. The big bell should never have rung at all. I'm not sure why it went off this morning. We'll pick up here